All right, we have to do some review on what percents are, how they work. Do you remember how to convert all of these? And get ready for Module 5. So what I want you to do is grab your sheet that has this gigantic chart on it. We're going to be talking about percent. And if you happen to remember breaking the word down, percent, cent has to do with 100. So you can think of words like century and centipede and cents when we talk about United States currency. Per often in math has to do with dividing. And so, yep, this definitely has to do with dividing out of 100. Percent basically is some sort of ratio where you're comparing a number out of 100 all the time. Okay, so you've got some value there. We use the symbol that looks like this, which also stands for a math operation that means divide by 100, like that. So we're going to do a little bit of review with fractions and decimals and percents. You probably know 1/2 by heart, that's the decimal 5/10. And as a percent, it looks like 50%. The decimal 0.3 is known as 3/10. That's how you'd write that value as a fraction. As a decimal, that's 30%. And likewise, if I give you the percent, 70%, that can be thought of as this fraction, 70 out of 100. There's that dividing by 100, which simplifies to be 7/10. Notice up here, I did not write it initially as 30/100ths, but anytime you see a percent, it's always that value compared to or divided by 100. Okay, this decimal in simplest, or I should say the fraction in simplest form is 7/10. So there you are as a decimal. So I want you to get familiar with a whole bunch of these and have them memorized so you don't have to resort to grabbing that calculator each time. So I'm going to start by having you fill in decimals that follow this pattern: 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, and so on. And by all means, go faster than I am because you might be able to write faster than me. When I get to 10/10, that's the same as 1, and I'm specifically going to write that with a decimal point and a 0 in the tens place just to emphasize that I'm writing it like a decimal. As a fraction, these all start as or are written as the tenths. Some of them, however, can be simplified. And so whenever we write fractions, please make sure it's good to see the pattern that these are all tenths, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, but then realize if we're getting to something where I'm asking for a final answer, I'd want you to put these in simplest form, like 2/5 and 1/2 and 3/5 and so on. 7/10 because 7 and 10 share no common factors. That already is in simplest form. 9/10. And then here, I will write it as 10/10, so you see the pattern that builds, but that equals 1 whole. As a percent, 1/10 is the same as 10/100ths, which is 10%. 2/10 is the same as 20/100ths, which is 20%. You can start to see the pattern here and go to town and fill in the rest of the chart. I will expect you to be able to fill in this chart if I give you, say, one thing in each of these columns, one of the values. I would expect you to generate the entire rest of this part of the table without a calculator, okay? And to do it pretty quickly, frankly, because it's all pretty straightforward patterns. All right, also on your sheet, now we have this table. It doesn't have as many spots, and that's because this is looking at the patterns for the eighths, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, and so on. I'm going to get the whole pattern written this way, and then I'm going to come back and get the fractions that can be written in simplest form, written in simplest form. 1/8 stays. This is 1/4. That's okay. 1/2. That's okay. 3/4. That's okay. Now, the ones you are probably most familiar with because they occur so frequently are the 1/2, and we know that that's 5/10 or 50%. 1/4, simply because these relate to money so well, you might recall right off the top of your head that that's 25/100, which is 25%. And 3/4 or 3/4, haha, 75/100 or 75%. And by the way, if you want to add an extra zero in the decimal, that's fine with me. Now, the eighths, now you can certainly go and grab your calculator, but I want you also to understand that the eighth is exactly halfway between 0 and 1/4. So likewise, the decimal is exactly half as large. And if you take 25/100 and take half of it, you'd get 125/1000. Sometimes it might be easier to look at that with the extra zero, and then it might be easier for you in your head to take half of it. This means this is 12.5% or 12 5/10%. Do you remember that as you change or convert from decimals to the percent, you move the decimal point 2 places to the right? That's like multiplying by 100. And then when we put the decimal sign there, that says divide by 100. So they kind of counteract that each other, and you have this same value. 3/8. Every single time you add an eighth or increase by an eighth, you are going to be increasing by 125 thousandths. So this is 375 thousandths, 37.5%. Here we are at the halfway. If it helps you to put extra zero there, because we're adding 125 thousandths each time. Here you go. 625 thousandths. We get to 7/8, and like I said, if it helps you to put that extra zero there, go ahead and do that. I'm all about having you look for patterns, being able to build things without grabbing that stinking calculator. And then here we get 1/2, which is 100%. I would expect now that given one item in each column, you could generate this entire table of patterns. All right, this last one down here is separate. I accidentally had an extra column there. This is reserved for, well, I forgot to put the zero in there. So this is reserved for our dear friends, the thirds. 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, which is 1. Well, this one's easy because we've seen that several times already. Do you remember what happened to the thirds when we have and convert those into a decimal? These guys are repeating decimals. For now, I want you not to round it off. I want you to write it exactly this way, because when you convert this into a percent, again, you multiply by 100 and you basically move it 2 places to the right, which means you'd get 33, and then you have 0.3 repeating percent. Likewise, 66.6 repeating percent. Sometimes you will also see it written this way. Instead of writing 0.3 repeating, they'll write it as 33 1/3%, 66 2/3%. But realize this percentage is the same as the fraction 1/3. It's a lot easier to do computations now with this fraction when you have a messy repeating decimal. All right. Now, here's something to think about. In following this pattern, if 1/3 is 0.3 repeating, 2/3 is 0.6 repeating, shouldn't 3/3 really be 0.9 repeating? And then shouldn't this be 99.9 repeating percent? Actually, that is true. But I'm going to save that for a later proof once we get into some linear equations and systems. But that is pretty cool. For now, just think of it this way. All right, now I like to teach percentages with the bar model. You've seen it somehow, some way before. I want you to just look at how I'm doing it with the bar model to see if it makes sense to you. I certainly don't want to mess you up at all, but I want you to think of it this way. I'm asking you what's 45% of 72. If I have this bar or rectangle and I draw the percent on top where I say the beginning is 0%, all the way full would be 100%, smack dab in the middle is 50%. And I say my number is 72. 72. If I said what's 100% of 72, it's 72. If I said what's 50% of 72, usually it's fairly quick in our head to take half of something. Half of 72 is 36. So 50% of 72 is 36. I'm asking you what's 45%. Now, up here, 45% is probably right about here in that ballpark. Before you even grab your calculator, if I said, what's your guess as to what 45% of 36 is, what would you say? I'd say, well, it should be pretty close, probably in the 30s or something like that. Well, go ahead and grab your calculator and perform this operation. Typically, when we say of, that's meaning multiply. So on your calculator, you can use the percent sign times 72. Or if you're old school like me, I simply would rather type the decimal, 45 hundredths, 0.45, times 72 to get my answer. Hey, up here, I was thinking it's probably, a 30 or so, something like that. Go ahead and do the math and you'll see, well, look at that. We get about 32 and 4/10%. The reason I have you look at this model is because I want you to think about it before you grab that stinking calculator. Let's look at another one. If I ask you what's 92% of 40, all right, 40 goes here at the 100% value. That's the number I'm taking a percentage of, and 100% of 40 would be 40. 92%? Holy cow, that'd be way up here, 92%. What do you think it's going to be equal to value-wise? Gosh, it should be really stinking close to 40, shouldn't it? Do you think it's about 38? Do you think it's about 37? It's somewhere close to that, to be sure, because 50% would be halfway. That'd be 20. And since these are easy numbers to deal with, if I went halfway, which would be 75%, that should be exactly 30. So this should be, I'm guessing, in the upper 30s. Grab your calculator and go ahead and multiply this out, 92%. Or if you like the decimal, take 0.92. Aha, 36.8. Look at that. That answer makes sense because when I look at it visually, ta-da, there you go. Here's another one. Ooh, what is 6% of 58? So 58's my total. I'm taking a percentage of 58. Let's see, halfway, that would be 29. 6%, not very much. Way down here is 6%. What do you think that's going to be? 2, 4, 6? I don't know. Pretty small, maybe about 2, maybe about 3, maybe about 4, something like that. Let's go ahead and do the math. 6%. You know me, I like to use my decimals instead because I'm so old. We didn't have handheld calculators when I was in 7th grade. 3 and 48 hundredths, so almost 3.5. Does that answer make sense? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. It should be pretty small. 6% is not very much. All right, let's get one last one in here. 10%. Ooh, 268. Hot diggity. That's a big number. All right, I'm taking a percentage of 268. 50% of 268 would be exactly halfway, 134. Okay, let's see. 10%, let's see. Here's 25%, it'd be there. If I kind of visualize, 10, 20, 30, that's not very good. 40, 50. All right, so here's about 10%. If this is 134, where do you suppose that is? Well, let's see. This would probably be about halfway. That's like 67. This would be, what, about 30? I don't know, about 15, 16, 17, something in that ballpark. Let's go ahead and do that. 10%. Oh, do you remember something really cool about the 10%? If you notice a pattern, this is basically the same as when you multiply by 1/10, that's the same as dividing by 10. So look what happens. You get 26 and 8/10. Yikes, my estimate was pretty low there, but this does make sense. I guess I haven't had enough coffee today. Do you notice what happened here? 10%. My digits are exactly the same, but my decimal point moved one place to the left. That's because you multiplied by 1/10, dividing by 10. Our number system is based on the tenths. Cool. Well, that's our great review of percents. Let's do one more for fun. What is 75% of 88? Here's 88. Halfway. I can do half of 88. 75% is smack dab in the middle here. You could probably do this even without a calculator. Okay, can you figure out what's exactly halfway between 44 and 88? If I asked you what's exactly halfway between 0 and 44, you'd say 22. So simply add another 22. There you go, 66. Hey, don't believe me? Go ahead and use your calculator to verify that value, and sure enough, you end up with 66. Alrighty, I am turning you loose on the assignment. Please check Schoology to see what your assignment is for the day. Yes, you can use your calculator, but I want you to think about it before you start punching those keys. Good luck, and may the force be with you.